All right, guys. Well, we have Jonah with us. Thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
I'm great, Katie. How you doing?
I'm doing well. It is raining over
Awesome.
here, but the sun is still shining, so we're good.
It's a
So
good combination.
it is, it is. So tell us a little bit about yourself. I know you're a former advisor, and then you
Mhm.
also do a lot of trainings and stuff like that. So tell us how you got into yearbook advising and your kind of history with it.
Sure. Um, so there's, I know this experience is probably common with a lot of folks. I got offered a position as a teacher. So my background is graphic design and photography. That's my training. So right out of college, like I worked for a little bit, got married, took a job as a designer, a very small company, and I realized I needed to be around people and not just sitting in front of a computer with nobody else to talk to. Um,
Relatable. That's very
so
similar to my
yeah,
story too.
so I remembered something from when I was like working during the summers. There was a lady I worked with, and she was like, "Oh, you'd be a good teacher." So I'm like, "Okay." I didn't have a teaching, background or education, but I just started contacting schools, and I brought my design portfolio with me in my interview, and just talked to them about my own training and like how I was encouraged. Like I didn't have an art background when I went to college. And so I'm like, if I can learn this, then others, there's hope for them. They can learn it. It's
Right.
not the I can't draw a stick figure kind of thing. So I got hired on at Mount Perrin Christian School in Kennesaw, Georgia. That's where I spent my entire teaching career of 9 years. Um, so it was oh, by the way, you're going to be teaching yearbook, you know.
Okay.
Um,
That
so
happens so
yeah,
often, just
I was the
voluntold.
art, yeah, I was the art teacher, or I was going to be the art teacher, but I was like, yeah, I'll do whatever you need me to do.
Yeah. You hired me. Thanks. Like,
Exactly. I was just super enthusiastic and no kids at that point, so tons of energy, right?
yeah.
Um, so I had no idea what I was doing there, no clue at all. So I didn't know the process, I didn't know like what needed to happen, but I did have the design background, desktop publishing. I'm a decent writer and I can edit well, which I think is more important than me being able to write well.
Yeah.
Um, and then that first year, so as a private school, we had a really small staff. So that first year, I think I had like 7 kids or 6 kids or something. Um, but there were co-editors, and they did a really good job of like training me. They're like,
Yeah.
okay, here's what we need to do, and here's the process. And then my yearbook rep was absolutely amazing. Like I'm still friends with her to this day. I love her. I love her team. Like I still work closely with them on a lot of
Yeah.
things. Um, so yeah, we just kind of got the ball rolling, and at the end of that first year, it was total survival mode, right? It's like let's just put out a product.
Mhm.
But we really elevated the design of that book and just took it like really clean and simple. There was no more scrapbooky type stuff. It was moving more towards a journalistic publication visually, and then as the years went by, we got the verbal side.
Mhm.
But we got a shout out at a local kind of end of year awards thing that our rep put together, and I was like, oh, this is kind of cool, right?
Maybe I'm a little good
Um,
at this.
yeah, so we just kept building on that, and I put some processes together. So I had some advantages because as I work as a workshop instructor and like you said, a trainer and educator, primarily with photography. But in talking to different advisors, I like to find out what their situation is.
Mhm.
And it's like, how many of you guys, you basically just have an open door and anybody can be on staff, and then versus how many of you actually get to control that flow with application and interview process and work samples and all that. So thankfully, I was that latter side of things where it was a invitation type class. You had to earn your way to be there.
Mhm.
But as the graphic design, photography, multimedia teacher, I could basically train my students for that next step
Right,
because
right.
they would get through my basic and like intermediate class, and I'd be like, well, guys, this is as far as we can go. Oh, except
You have the
you know,
choice of
um,
applying to get on staff. Yeah.
yes, and the thing that I like the way that our program ran, it ran well with us tracking our students in terms of you're going to be a designer, you're going to be a photographer, you're a writer, right? Um, and of course, it's not like 100% you're doing that. There is like an 80-20. Like, you're still going to do this. You're still going to participate. My photographers still did their base captions they captured all the information, the quotes, and then they put together the information, and then a
Mhm.
wordsmith would make it sound good.
Right,
Uh,
right.
but that actually that style of approach with my students actually got people on staff that would have never ever been there. Like I had one of my years, I think my biggest staff was 14 or 17, I can't remember. But I had like a team of 6 designers, and they were all um, people that would not have been on yearbook if it was just yearbook. So,
Right.
I try to encourage when I'm talking to advisors about recruiting students, or even other students about, hey, invite people that have a certain skill and do what you can to to make it so they can spend the majority of their time doing that thing.
Right.
Uh, and your book gets stronger. I mean, we had really solid design, we had solid photography, we had solid writing because they were good at that and they were able to drill down and make it better.
They
So,
become a specialist in that particular
yes,
thing. So,
yeah, I'm a huge proponent of that. And then, yeah, so since then, I advised for 9 years. 2015 was my last year, so I didn't go through all the craziness that everybody had to deal with the last few years.
mhm.
Um, but I definitely empathized with them, and that is actually what prompted like the yearbook photo mentorship, yearbook photo mentor, which is what I do now. Um, because as a workshop instructor, I loved working with the students, and like they come in with no skill and then they leave with confidence and a foundation that they can build on. Or if they're already kind of there, then I can kind of help them drill deeper into certain things, especially the storytelling side of things.
Yeah.
So when everybody lost their summer workshops, which I know are back full steam pretty much now, which is awesome. But when they lost that resource, I'm like, we got to do something, right? So I'm like, I can't do the whole thing bandwidth wise. Like I said, I'm competent in certain areas, but I'm really good with photography,
Mhm.
doing it and teaching it. So like that's going to be my niche. That's where I'm going to put all of my resources and my efforts, and being that that expert that is right there for you,
Mhm.
uh, to reach out to train your students, because advisors wear a lot of hats, and even if you are good at everything, like your time is like this,
Right.
and you can't focus on everything. So I want to be that resource that helps advisors in training themselves, but also their students. And that's what I've been doing the last couple of years, along with still working as photographer, designer, um, other this and that's that are out there. My hands are in a lot of different pots, I think is the term.
Yeah.
But it's fun. I enjoy it.
Yeah, that makes sense. You're so good at photography. I know you started as a designer, but
Mhm.
photography, I mean, works hand in hand with design too.
Right.
But just following you on Instagram and stuff, the pictures that you take of your family are just incredible. Like you have this ability to really capture a moment that is seemingly so mundane, like just them playing, doing things that they
Yeah.
do every day. But the way you've like harnessed the light and maybe some
Mhm.
editing and stuff like that, like you just tell such a good story with your photography. And that's what I think is so valuable from a journalistic perspective for students and for
Mhm.
advisors to really learn is that it's not just the technical skills of using your camera, it's looking
Right.
at stories. And you demonstrate that so well with your own family, but that's obviously what we want students to be doing too. So
Yeah.
it's kind of how you teach your mentorship program and it's an online course kind of, right? So just talk us a little bit through what you're.
Sure. So yeah, I have yearbookphotomentor.com, which right now just basically points towards my mentorship program. Um, Dreams of expanding that into more available resources is there, but I really want to serve the schools that have reached out to me and want to partner with me. So I'm got my energy there. But what I did, or what I've done inside of there, it's an online platform, so it's all virtual. Um, if it's a local school, I can come and do some things local. But developing it virtually, I've got a school in Texas that I work with, and so we couldn't do that if I was just local, right? So what I've put together in there is lots of different training videos and resources. Um, Mainly, what I put a ton of my effort into was a foundations course. So it's teaching, like I took it from my workshop experience. It's like if I have a 3-day workshop, what am I going to leave them with?
Mhm.
And it's, well, okay, solid technical skills, right? I want them to know manual mode. Do they have to always shoot in manual mode? No, right? Because we've got the semi-auto modes, which I would push them to sometimes. But you need to know the foundations. You need to know manual mode, basic composition, and going through those things that within your frame that make the photo more interesting. And then teaching about light, like that is huge, right? And you were just saying, you can take the most mundane moment, or space, and when the light comes through the window, I'm a light nerd, and I tell my students this. I'm like, I'm going to ruin you forever when I teach you about light,
Yeah.
because you're going to start just saying things about it, and people are going to look at you funny because, you know, you're talking about how beautiful the light is hitting that pencil on the desk. I don't
Mhm.
know. But it's true. I mean, there's the quality of the light that just makes a photo just look amazing, and recognizing that, but also knowing how to capture it. So technical skills, composition, light, and then storytelling is my fourth pillar, is what I call it, of the foundations. And then from there, I've got other videos that go in, smartphone photography specific, which same concepts, right? Just dialed in for one particular usage. Sports and action photography tips, goal setting, which you and I have talked about before, and I love, like, that's huge. Setting yourself up to get 1% better every year,
Yeah.
picking one thing to work on and really doing it well. Um, and then, we'll go into, when we get into white balance, metering modes, focus, and deeper into storytelling and following an event from start to finish, like those kind of things. But also editing, like you mentioned. Yes, I do edit, but I would say I'm a purist, in the
Mhm.
sense of I want my photos to look natural and authentic. So, and that's what I teach when I teach students about editing, especially, and it's huge for yearbook,
Mhm.
because if you've got, five photographers and they all have a personal style, or they're figuring out a personal style,
Right. Or they
then your
really
book,
love a certain filter. Oh my gosh.
yeah,
Like filter it all.
uh-uh,
It may look good on their own, but they don't look
right.
great as a publication. And that's not
Hmm.
also, journalistically, that is not what reality looked like. So,
Yes. Yeah. So I tell them, I'm like, leave your personal style at the door, and I give them a basic editing formula. And it's the idea of, you're going to be a good photographer, and your editing is going to enhance a photo rather than save a photo,
mhm.
right? Like, you just want to tweak it a little bit to add the life into it back,
Right.
because cameras can't capture everything that we can see,
Mhm.
with our eyes, with the depth of color and light and shadow and all that. So,
Yeah, especially when things are
um,
printed and the ink soaks into that paper. It's
yes,
different than being on a backlit screen, is what I always tell students. And they're like, I never
yes,
thought about that.
yeah,
Or
yeah.
they don't edit at all. And I'm like, well, you need to edit a little bit. Like you need to do some
Right.
photos, but
Yeah, there's, nearly every photo you see, like, you're not seeing the original version of it, especially if photographers are shooting in RAW, right? Because RAW purposely does not add anything to that image. It makes it more flat and subtle, and then you craft your vision, for the finished look. So,
yeah.
uh, but there's all of that kind of training, but also,
Stop you real fast.
um,
Can you explain what a
oh
raw
yeah,
photo is? Because I know we have
yes,
a lot of new advisors that watch these, and I know that when I first started doing photography, I did not learn about raw photography at all. And then when I did, I was like, "Why the heck is my memory card not lasting as long?" And so, just for the new advisors that might not know, can you explain real quick before I didn't mean to interrupt you, but explain what the raw photo
no,
is?
good interruption, because because people would be thinking, what is RAW? Like, what does that mean? So we're talking file formats. You're typically going to be shooting JPEG images, when, a photo that needs to be uploaded to Instagram or submitted um, to your publisher for printing. You submit it as a JPEG usually. So that's your finished file format. It's shareable, right? A raw image, and the extension at the end. I'm trying to think of the word for a second. The extension at the end wouldn't be .jpg, that's JPEG. It would be .nef for Nikon. I think Canon might be CR2.
Yeah, too. Yeah.
Um, Sony is something. So they have this different little proprietary acronym there. But a raw file format basically just means the camera captures the image, but doesn't apply any kind of, adjusting or editing to it, because what a lot of people don't know is a JPEG image has already been edited by the camera. And
Hmm.
that's where you can go into that camera and you can set your picture controls or picture styles.
Hmm.
And if you look at those, there's I'm trying to remember some of them because I don't use them, but it's like, vivid or natural or,
Thick or like portraits where it
yes,
smooth your skin and stuff.
yes. So basically what the camera is doing is it's applying contrast and color boost, saturation boost, sharpness boosting or lessening if it's trying to smooth skin. And then it's compressing the file size so it's not as big because cameras today are like like you're saying, my memory card's filling up.
Yeah.
Yeah, so JPEGs are smaller file size, but what ends up happening is the image has basic information thrown away and you can't recover it. So when you try to edit a JPEG image, you're more limited in what you can do
Mhm.
because you don't have that full range of contrast, because the camera's already compressed it a little bit. And
Right.
so with a raw image, it's all there. The file size is bigger. It does not look nearly as impressive when you pull up a raw image on the computer versus a JPEG that's already been pre-done. But you have all the freedom to make all the tweaks. And you really can save an image. Like if you
Oh yeah.
know if you know that you're going into an environment and your lens and your camera combination, it's a low light environment and you don't have high end equipment, and you're like, okay, I'm going to push my settings to the max, but it's still going to look rough. Shoot RAW, don't shoot JPEG because you can recover and salvage that image into a much more usable image than if it was just JPEG.
Yeah,
Uh,
I actually have a funny story about that. Before I was a teacher, I was doing freelance photography
mhm.
and had absolutely no business shooting weddings. I did. And so it was, I was like helping a friend out or something. It wasn't like a high
Mhm.
stakes situation, but it's a
Yeah,
wedding. It's a high stakes situation.
kind of important.
And was tinkering with my settings, whatever. I had probably just learned about raw photos. So I was like, let's try it. And something was wrong when I moved from the outdoor ceremony to the indoor of them walking in. And
Hmm.
those photos were so dark. And I was literally in the bathroom looking after I looked at them on the back of the camera, crying because I was like,
Yeah.
I lost that moment. And I was like, thank God it wasn't the kiss or something, more
Hmm.
important moment. But then I was like, well, they're in raw. Maybe we'll figure it out, whatever. So I get back to the computer the next day and I was shocked at the level of black that I was able to recover because there was so much more data than I was used to in the
Yep.
JPEGs. And they were fine. I was able to save
Hmm.
them just fine and export them as JPEGs, and no one ever knew. And then I've been a raw supporter ever since because you just never know. Like those situations,
Hmm.
especially with students, happen all the time, and you can fix a lot of it. And not that you want to
Yeah.
rely on it to fix, but you can.
Right. And that's so I've kind of I've come to a middle ground when I talk with students about, how many of you guys shoot in RAW? And then sometimes it's like our advisor won't let us. And I'm like, here's why. I totally get it, right? Because the file size, it changes your workflow.
Yeah. You
Because
need
you
more time
have
to
to
process
you
them.
yeah, you have to at least open it and save it, right? So what I've told them, I'm like, come talk to your advisor, be diplomatic, and be like, hey, let's find a middle ground here. So you can shoot RAW plus JPEG. You
Mhm.
buy a memory card big enough, RAW plus JPEG, it'll record both types of file formats. So if it's a perfect image, it's acceptable. You send it off, you're ready to send it off. Just use the JPEG, throw the RAW away. But if you get to a scenario where, like you said, you need to salvage it because of something that happened, that raw image is what you're going to want to use. Um, and it's going to, kind of save you where you might just be like, okay, we have nothing to go with here.
Yeah, but
Awesome.
I recommend playing with it before you go shoot a wedding. Know what you're doing,
Yes.
and really though, like take a picture that's too dark and go put it in Photoshop and look at the levels that you have to work with versus before. It really will open your eyes to it.
Yeah.
And the storage thing, I mean, this was in like 2010,
Hmm.
11, where storage was more expensive. And now you can get memory cards that are huge and fast for so
Yeah.
much cheaper that that argument really isn't valid anymore, I feel like.
Right. Now the main concern camera wise and memory card wise isn't the storage size, it's the buffer in the camera, which if people don't know what the buffer is, that's basically when you put it on burst mode and just hold the button down and click, 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 right? Which I certainly advocate for sports and action because you're trying to catch that facial expression. But your buffer will run out because the camera basically records the image in the camera and then moves it to the memory card.
Mm-hmm.
And so you basically, if you have those huge raw files, then the line it's like a traffic jam basically.
Right.
So that's just one, that's the bigger concern now to keep in mind. But I've actually never ran into that problem because I don't shoot 20, 30, 40 image bursts. Like
Mhm.
I know that 5 to 6 is going to be fine for what I need to do.
Right. Because you're anticipating that moment and then
Exactly.
shooting with intention. Yeah.
Yep.
Which is a hard concept, I think, for students to learn, especially
Mhm.
as they're starting out and practicing. But I
Right.
think you get the hang of it more. And I think also a lot of advisors aren't, particularly brand new advisors that might not have the background in the design aspects. They might
Mhm.
be an English teacher is really common. Or lately, I've been seeing a lot of like history teachers, math teachers just thrown in.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, it's kind of
Understandable, I guess, though.
interesting. Yeah, it's like whoever is willing to do it. And if you're kind of sort of creative, like they're like, try it out and see. But they have like no
Good
training
luck.
in photography. Yeah, good luck. And so they, just their kids into it and they don't know the basics. And so they
Mhm.
they get overwhelmed by, oh, the camera's locking up and saving those photos. What do I do? And so
Right.
I think that it's something that you work up to. Like I wouldn't necessarily say
Right.
like day one as an advisor, you're doing raw photography. Like it's something
Mhm.
maybe you learn the basics first, but
Yes.
yeah.
And that is like that particular side of things that you were just talking about, not knowing and just kind of throwing them in. And, a lot of times the advisors learning with the students as they go.
Mm-hmm.
That was a big catalyst for me starting my mentorship program because, I want to help them get trained as well. And, along with the videos are they're bite size, I call them bite size. So 15, 10 to 15 minutes each, one concept, except for, the sports one, the camera phone or mobile photography, like those are about 30 minutes. They're a little bit longer because it's one big concept. But I have a workbook. I have like action tasks, which are, hey, practice this. This is what you should get. Purposely shoot it wrong so you can see what happens when you don't change something the way you need to, and stuff like that. So, and then students can submit images for feedback. Um, they can send me questions. So that's like my bigger heart for it is when you run into a problem, because anybody can learn on YouTube,
Right.
right? You can, what is white balance? Go on there and find out. But when it's going wrong, that's when you need like somebody that you can call or email, like get
Mhm.
a real live person and not just comment on a YouTube video and hope that
Hope
they're
that
going to
someone
see it.
replies. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the bigger part for me is like, and that's part of my program is I want to be accessible.
Mhm.
When you have that big problem, like let me know if you want to send me the image. I can look at the data because that's another thing about it. Like I can see the DNA when I pull it up in my editing program, and I'm like, okay, I had a student send me some pictures, and he was having issues with they were looking blurry. All right, and he had learned. He went through my workshop in the summer. He had learned about minimum shutter speed because if you get too slow, you're gonna see
Blurry.
show the motion in the shot. If you're not, if you're moving and shaking, you're gonna pick up blur.
Mhm.
Um, if it's out of focus slightly. So he sent me some shots and I just kind of reviewed them for him and some of them were motion blur related. Most of them though he had his shutter speed good enough.
Mhm.
So I'm like, hey, I think you just missed focus here. It focused just behind your subject.
Right.
So and then I taught him a little, I basically recorded a little video for him as I went through his photos. And
Yeah.
so he would have that as a resource, not just right then, but also later if he needed to go back to it.
Yeah. That's so useful. I mean, especially, I think your audience is primarily school staffs. Like it's not
Mhm.
just advisors or just students. Like it's really the
Right.
whole the whole staff.
Yeah.
But it's so useful for in particular a new advisor who wants to help a student but doesn't know how, like doesn't even know it
Yes.
themselves to be able to teach them, and then they learn alongside,
Mhm.
the student with those videos and stuff, and really that hand holding one-on-one mentorship, I think, is what makes it so much different than a lot of the photography training out there. Even photography training within the yearbook world
Mhm.
is primarily focused on either the technical side or the storytelling side,
Mhm.
but not the doing and the action steps and the practicing and that really hand holding that you need a professional, by
Yeah.
your side to teach you because it's sometimes a nuanced problem that, takes a little figuring out. So that's so helpful,
Yes.
I'm sure, to staffs to have you in their pocket.
Absolutely. it reminds me of I had a super enthusiastic, I was going to say a student, but he was actually an assist. He ended up being an assistant at a workshop I taught a few years back. So I think he was a graduate, and came back to assist.
Mhm.
And like a week after the workshop, he emailed me and was like, I've talked to my former advisor and I'm going to go teach photography to the all the students there. Can you share all your presentations? And
Mm.
I'm like, no. Here's why. It's not proprietary information or anything. Now, all the photos in there do belong to me or my students, and I'm not just going to hand those over. But I was like, here's the bigger reason why. To teach something, you need to know what to say or do when it goes wrong.
Right.
And you're not there yet. Like you have grasped the information,
Mhm.
but when somebody's like, "Hey, I tried that, it's not working," do you know what to say yet?
Right.
And that's something that I want to help those more advanced photographers understand.
Mhm.
Is look, be a you like I'm going to mentor you guys and your staff and your advisor, your students, but I want you to get to the goal of being a mentor. And
Right.
so let's work with you on that so that you can be the one who can answer their questions and you can set up an awesome, a awesome workflow for your staff to just jump in and follow. And that can be huge for changing the dynamic and the trajectory of a program.
Oh yeah. I mean, the culture just becomes the norm where the students are teaching the students. And,
Mm-hmm.
from an administration perspective, I'm assuming because I was never an administrator, but they want to see student-led learning. They want to see
Yeah.
that, year over year, they're teaching each other. And so
Mm-hmm.
spending a lot of time in the beginning of building a program, like teaching those foundational skills and then investing in those kids and then teaching
Mm-hmm.
them how to teach also can be so helpful on letting it grow. But then also, they're still students, they're still kids, they're still going to make mistakes. So
Right.
you're there as a mentor to be like, okay, actually, let me stop you there. And here's what you should do instead. So I think that that's such a good point also, and advice for new advisors that are
Mm-hmm.
building their program is invest in those kids you have now for like better and easier work forever for moving on.
Yes. And talking about my background again, if somebody's like, well, listening right now and they're like, oh, well, I don't have a background as a designer or a photographer. Look, my second year advising, so that first year again, total just, what am I
Survival.
doing? Like
Yeah.
I wrote the teacher art at my, not to go on, don't let me go on a rant, Katie. But art at my school when I came in, it was literally like recess, kids are going to do what they want, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like classically trained artist here
Yeah.
coming in. I was teaching traditional arts and digital arts.
Okay.
After about 4 or 5 years, I just moved over just to all the digital multimedia
Mhm.
and publication. But I went in there and I just like turned everything upside down. But I had to write all of my curriculum,
Right.
and so I had like 7 preps or what. It was ridiculous.
Ooh.
And that was pretty much every year because I kept building the whole program. Like let's
Mhm.
let's have art 2, let's have art 3,
Right.
let's have advanced graphic design, let's introduce a photography class because we didn't have one, let's
Mhm.
have video product. So
You made your own work more.
I did. But I mean, it's what the students needed. Like I wanted to provide for them, um, and get them like the resources that they needed. But going back, so coming back off my rant, talking about, oh, I don't have that background. My either second year or third year as an advisor, I can't remember which. I think it was second. I had a student on yearbook staff, and he was a really, really talented photographer. Um, he actually, so fun fact, people ask Canon versus Nikon, or now, Canon, Nikon, or Sony, which one should I get? Um, doesn't matter, right? It depends on what system do you already have, because if you already have a system, stick with the system because that's a big investment to transition. But that year, I'm a Nikon shooter and I have been for 15 years. But the reason why is because partway through the beginning of year 2, our camera broke. Like something that my student was super careful with it, and he just brought it back to me. He's like, Mr. Fisher, it quit working and something broke in the lens.
Mm.
And it was an old Canon. I don't even know what it was. It was a Canon something or other. So I'm like, okay, well, let's get some new gear, right? So this one really talented photographer had not his own personal Nikon.
Hmm.
And so I'm like, well, we could effectively double our camera stash
Yeah.
by buying a Nikon because he will have his own camera and he was doing a lot of shooting for us. And we could start buying nicer lenses, but he had his own 50 millimeter, nifty 50 lens. So we
Mhm.
literally switched to Nikon because it was advantageous to us.
Yeah.
But one of the things that is awesome about that student is I learned on film. And with film, color balancing, you put a filter on the end of the camera
Hmm.
if you need to balance the color. With digital, it's called white balance. And that was literally a light bulb moment for me. It changed my photography forever
Hmm.
because when you look at a picture on the back of the camera and the color is off, it's just like, it's such a mediocre picture.
Right.
So terrible. I'm a terrible photographer. It's like, no, you just don't know how to use one setting.
Yeah.
You have to tell your camera the color of the light so it can make it look real and nice, right?
Mhm.
So he showed me white balance. He taught me white balance and it like changed my world. So I'm forever indebted to that student.
Yeah. I
But
think
this
there's
was
so many
somebody,
things that students teach us all the time, especially if
yeah,
you have an advisor coming in and kids have already been on staff. Like, listen to them. They do have
yes,
insight.
absolutely. Yeah, don't be too proud and take off your and this is one thing I love about educators is most of them are lifelong learners. Like we get into education because we A want to help people, but B, we love learning.
Hmm.
And like I want to keep learning more and more and more. And you're never going to exhaust, the resources out there. Like I am never going to be I know everything about photography type of person. It's like there's always something new that I can get better at or learn differently.
Hmm.
So be humble enough to to ask questions and
Yeah.
listen when they talk, and then if you're skeptical, then try it at least and see what happens.
Yeah, play with it. And in any creative field, I mean, there's nuance. Like it's not just
Hmm.
once you learn all the things in your course, for instance, then you know everything there is to know about photography. I mean,
Right.
it evolves and shifts and you adapt and stuff like that. So okay, so you explained a couple of different things that you would do with your students, like
Hmm.
investing in them to teach each other and really focusing on learning the technical photography in order to focus on the story. So how would you recommend like a new advisor breaks down how they teach photography? That's one of the most often
Hmm.
questions I get about photography is where do I start? Like there's so many things. What's the most important? And do I need to teach it all even?
Yeah. um I would approach this differently. It's almost like the budget question. It's like if somebody's like, what camera should I buy? It's like, well, let's unpack that a little bit. How
Yeah.
much money do you have? What equipment do you already have? Like that kind of thing. I approach this kind of the same way because for me, it's not so much, how much money do you have? It's how much time do you have?
Hmm.
Because if I'm teaching a full 3-day workshop, I start them with manual mode. And because these are dedicated photography students, they have paid to be there. They're going to listen to me.
Hmm.
And I'm going to walk them through manual mode first and then get into composition, light, and story. I know other workshop instructors that flip it and they actually start with story first or they start with composition first because those are the easiest to really quickly like make a difference with your photos. Even if you're shooting in auto mode or, I pick up my phone and I shoot with my phone, like I can still tell a great story and make an engaging image because I know how to compose it. But the reason I start with manual mode first is because I want them, it's the hardest to really grasp.
Right.
And so while they're there with me for 3 days, I want them to understand it and to hit all the problems
Mhm.
so that they get a lot of practice with it. So for an advisor, if they have a solid chunk of time, if they're starting out at the beginning of the year, and this is how I structured in my foundations course, like I've got it basically for 8 weeks.
Mhm.
If you do have your photographers work through this in 8 weeks, start with um, your technical skills and then composition, light, and story, right? Um, you can compress that to 4 weeks and just really hit it fast and hard. But if you need to flip that for some reason, you need images to happen right now. Like if I had an hour to talk with a student and they're like, what do I do? Um, I think what I would do, my goal would be get them off of auto mode because you lose a lot of control in auto mode. A lot of people think, well, it just controls the exposure and everything, right? Auto mode also does not allow you to change your focus points, and it pops up that pesky little flash, which yeah, the pop-up flash is never ever useful.
Yeah.
Like there's like two images where it might work. Um, but it's things like that that you don't really understand some of the things that you can actually change if you just simply go to program mode, which is your first semi-auto mode. But what I would probably do would be, okay, I'm going to move them to aperture priority mode because that gets that compressed depth of field, blur out the background, instantly draws attention to your subject. Um, and I would get them at least to basically understand what aperture, shutter speed, and ISO are,
Mhm.
but they wouldn't necessarily have to change them all. So I'd move them to a priority mode, and then I would talk about basic composition, rule of thirds, filling the frame, leading line, framing, those four very, very basics.
Mhm.
Particularly because those are the things that they can see inside of their front viewfinder, and they can control them very, very easily and really change the look of an image.
Mhm.
Especially the idea about filling the frame. I'm a quotes person. I love quotes, and so it's like just about everybody that has anything to do with photography knows the quote of, if your pictures aren't good enough, you're not close enough. It's
Right.
stated by Robert Capa, famous war photographer. And it basically, I tell people it means move your feet. Like
Mhm.
get
Zoom
in
with your
there.
feet. Yeah.
Yes, zoom with your feet. Get in there close because the story changes the closer you are. Like it changes inside of you because you're like, oh, I'm feeling something different now.
Yeah.
And so that will be communicated through your viewfinder, but also frame up a tighter shot so there's not all this dead space around the outside. Because you're trying to tell people something about an event or story, and you know that you know what the story is because you're photographing it. So make sure that they know what the story is, and
Mhm.
that's your composition. Um, that's that storytelling aspect of watching for that perfect moment, that perfect expression, or the perfect that moment of action. So I would just tell them, be curious, observe, um, and use those composition techniques, and then like I said, move into that semi-auto mode. That's probably where I would go in an hour with them, just to kind of get them going. And if I knew that they were shooting a certain scenario,
Mhm.
then I would try to give them some tips specifically on that. So hopefully it's not a theater production. It's like I have to go shoot the play. Good luck.
It's dark in there. Yeah.
It's that is my absolute favorite thing to shoot. I was, thinking through because I always ask the question of students, what do you like to shoot? What's your favorite subject?
That was my next
Um,
question for you. So tell us, what is your favorite thing to shoot?
my favorite. So I really, really, really love because I love stories. I love storytelling. And environmental portraiture, I think is amazing. So I like to shoot portraits, but as an introvert, you kind of get exhausted
Mhm.
because you're creating conversation and you're being, trying to make your subject comfortable and everything. So I really, really love shooting events, but particularly theater. Like I love theatrical productions because it's such a challenge
Mhm.
with the lighting. And so I've got that challenge there for me that keeps me alive.
Mhm.
And it's not boring by any means, but it's also a built-in story,
Yeah.
right? And so you just have to follow it. And I tell people, talking about a photographer, in one of my sessions that I teach, I'm like, one of the last things I say is, um, you need to be working harder than anybody else that's there. Like you show up early, you leave late, you are moving, you are on the like go, 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 go from start to finish. And when I shoot theater, because even though I don't teach anymore in a school, I'm connected with a local theater group that I'll shoot a couple of shows for them each year.
Mhm.
And I'm sweating more than the cast is.
Oh
Like
yeah, you
I
are
am like
grooving and grooving.
I am always moving because I'm trying to always anticipate what's happening. And this is, I'm there at a dress rehearsal. That's another thing that is, a lot of people don't know. It's like, how do you get these great shots? Well, you don't go to a show where you're restricted by the audience.
Mhm.
You go at a dress rehearsal because you are literally like, I love this little group that I shoot with because like I'm a VIP when I go shoot. They're like, okay, you know, directors and assistant directors, we can't sit in the middle. We're going to move off to the side, so we're not
Yeah.
blocking Jonah's centered shots.
Have you
And I
been
always
asked
tell them,
to
I'm like,
practice multiple scenes? I've like got on stage before and like
oh
got
yeah,
in their face a little bit where you're obviously not going to do that in the middle of a performance, but
right.
you have access like no other if you go to a dress
Hmm. Yep, absolutely. You don't have to worry about drawing attention to yourself either.
rehearsal. Or annoying
So
people with the clicks. Like mirrorless, it doesn't have that problem anymore. But
yes,
the clicks, I remember my students would come back and people would be like, they complained about us clicking, but we have to take pictures. And I was like, that's when I learned, oh, I should probably have them go to dress rehearsal.
yeah,
So,
yeah. It's a big deal for productions or ceremonies.
mhm.
And also, but fun fact, if you don't know this, that's a huge deal for golf
Mm,
because one of the rules for golf is you cannot distract the golfer, particularly when they're setting up for their drive. So they get to the hole at the very beginning, they tee up their shot. Um, you will get in trouble or kicked off if you are close enough and you're clicking through and they're hearing your shutter. So that's where the zoom lens always is great because you can be far enough away that you're zoomed in. But I remember a moment in history, and I can't remember exactly when it was, but it was like the advent of mirrorless cameras. It's like the
yeah.
very first ones. And, just like when film, when, digital first came on the scene, all the film photographers kind of scoffed at digital. And I mean, I was kind of one of them at first. Kind of like, you look at the picture and it's not
But you're
that
also
great.
like, from a photography perspective, a film guy, you're like, how can you get rid of the mirror? Like, we need that.
Right. But the neat thing about that shot, and I think it was like the Masters or something, like huge golf tournament,
Mhm.
and a photographer, had a mirrorless camera on silent, and he got like this. It was like Tiger Woods or some, super famous golfer. You can tell how much I know about the sport, right? Um,
More than
but he got these amazing shots of that moment that nobody else had ever captured,
right.
and it was because the equipment, technology moved, and he was one of the innovators with it. So it's super super helpful. And now, pretty much everything is moving that direction.
Yeah, it seems like, and that's actually a problem that I think a lot of advisors are facing is that they, as they upgrade their equipment, they
Hmm.
can't get regular DSLRs anymore. All the manufacturers are moving towards mirrorless, but the cost is so much higher right now.
Yeah.
So, what do you recommend as they, develop a program, or maybe they have some money that they need to spend?
Hmm.
Like, what do you recommend they buy as we transition, everything over kind of to mirrorless?
So this is one of my like absolute favorite like secret things that I tell
Oh,
people.
great.
So again, the budget question. It is a like we need to sit down and have a conversation to find out where you're at. But I love like I'm a thrifter. Like me and my wife for fun, we go to thrift stores and I love finding treasure. It's like treasure
Mhm.
hunting.
Oh,
So the
yeah.
same kind of thing with wanting my money to stretch as far as it can as a photography instructor. So I would almost never buy things brand new. But there's an asterisk there, right? Um, Lenses and like accessories or like flash units, I always look for them used.
Mhm.
And usually like Canon and Nikon's websites, like they have a used section or a refurbished section, which is great. The big camera, like third party sellers, B&H Photo Video and Adorama, they're both flagship stores in New York, which is awesome. If you ever get a chance to go there, it's crazy. But their websites, like they have a used gear section and they rate it, which is pretty awesome. And then here's the secret one, my absolute favorite, and it may not be totally a secret, but there is a reseller called KEH. It's KEH.com.
I'll
And
put a
they're
link
actually
in the description
what's
box.
that?
I'll
Okay,
put a
awesome.
link in the description.
Yeah. So they sell a lot of used gear and their rating system is phenomenal. Like I've bought things from them, lenses, and they're better quality than what they say they are.
Great.
Um, so we would, you get a lot of bang for your buck with that, buying used or buying refurbished.
Mhm.
Um, Now, I wouldn't say this 10 years ago, but now even some of the third party lenses, like Sigma lenses, have come a long, long way. And so if I'm looking at a 70 to 200, Nikon 70 to 200 is like $2,200 brand new. It's like, oh man. Sigma's brand new is like 1,600. So I'm like, you know,
Yeah.
I can do that. It's heavier, the autofocus may not be quite as fast, but I've actually like I rent it when I go and do some things where I need a long lens because I don't have my own,
Mhm.
and I've been happy with it. Um, Another thing I'll do is I'll buy a previous version. So you can save a good bit of money doing that. With camera bodies themselves, so to your main question there, um, that one's a little bit of a catch 22, right? Because you're right, none of the manufacturers, to my knowledge, are putting any of their attention at new DSLRs.
Yeah.
So all of their innovation, all their tech, all of their future casting is all mirrorless. That doesn't mean DSLRs are gone yet or are going away in the next 20 years, right? Like 20 years from now, you'd have a real
Hmm.
problem trying to get stuff. But depending on what gear a school has now, and depending on their budget, it's like, yeah, you may want to go ahead and buy a couple more DSLRs. Ideally, what I would look for, or what I would encourage people to do, is start moving to mirrorless, but only with the camera bodies.
Hmm.
Because if you're able to stay in the same system, then you can actually, like Canon and Nikon both, have a lens adapter that
Yeah.
just literally, it's literally a spacer. It doesn't do anything to the quality of the image. It just adds a little bit more space between the camera body and the lens because there's no mirror there anymore.
Yeah.
Um,
And it
and you
just
can,
makes it so you can connect because you have different
yep,
bases.
yep. So you can still use all your DSLR lenses on your new mirrorless cameras. They're yeah, the lenses are bigger and heavier, and they may look a little goofy, you know.
Yeah, and you're
Gotta,
gonna lose the crop, like the crop sensor, where you don't have on a mirrorless, you don't have that. But I mean, as a student, you're probably not even gonna notice.
yeah, and it does depend on which camera body you buy.
Mhm.
So because some of the mirrorless ones do have full frame sensors, some of them do have crop sensors. So there's still that aspect to look at. But you can gradually start moving. And camera bodies are the one thing that I pretty much always bought new
Mhm.
or refurbished. Like I wanted that one particularly because we were going to get so much life out of it,
Mhm.
and that's where the technology changes more quickly. Lenses like Nikon 70 to 200, there's like if I remember, I think there are like three versions in or something, and this is over I don't even know how many years,
Yeah, a
right?
lot.
And you can still use the first version. It just they've tweaked the sharpness a little bit. The autofocus speed is a little faster. The motor, but you can get amazing images with that first edition. So you take care of your glass and it's going to last you a really, really, really long time.
Yeah.
So it really is those camera bodies, like they're going to be your workhorse. Um, so you want to get as much life out of them as possible.
Yeah, that's what I always say. When people ask, do I recommend putting money into lenses or into camera
Mm-hmm.
bodies? I always say lenses
Yeah.
because they can I mean, they're going to stand the test of time. Versus a camera body, there is a certain point. It's like a car where the engine is just done.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you do need to
Yeah.
upgrade. So, obviously, you spend more, you're going to get more life out of it, probably. But at some point, you are going to have to upgrade that thing. So,
Yeah. And to give you perspective on that, the camera, my personal camera is a Nikon D700. I still have it. You can look it up and be like, whoa, yeah, this guy's old. Like they quit making it in 2008, I think.
mhm.
But it was the first. It was the major, like talking about wedding photographers. It was the major like camera of choice for photojournalists and wedding photographers that shot Nikon
Mhm.
because the sensor, like what it does to the images, it's got a quality to it that is just absolutely amazing. It's a 12 megapixel camera. All right, that's not real high if you look at megapixels. I'm not a big megapixel counter.
Yeah, the new
Um,
iPhone just came out and it has like 42, and I was like,
yeah, why? No.
yeah.
So for all of you guys listening, megapixels are less important than sensor size. If you're going to put your money into something, get a full frame sensor instead of a crop sensor and less megapixels. Because the sensor is what captures that image, and that larger sensor captures more data and detail in the image. So it's awesome.
Good advice.
But I still use it, and comparable to current cameras, and I wouldn't say no to upgrading, but I look at my budget and it's like, where do I want to spend my money?
Mhm.
Um, but I definitely am ready to upgrade. I'm looking, and particularly because my high end of my ISO. All right, so we won't go into all that, because that would take a little bit to talk about. But the high end of the camera quality of the image, the ISO is 6400, which now you can get really usable quality images at one, two, three times that much or four times that much with some cameras.
Yeah.
And that like that plays huge for the amount of freedom you have with your camera settings to
For sure.
capture low light, images and whatnot. Um, so that's one of those technological advances that make it worthwhile to go up in the
Yeah.
camera tech.
Which is so cool because, back when it was fully manual film photography, I mean, these were things like you said with the golf that like were just the technology was prohibitive. Like there's no way we could have
Yes.
achieved any of this with film. And so it's so cool to live in an age now where there's, all this tech happening. We get to play with it. So I
Mm-hmm.
think it's so fun.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I have one. Oh, go on. You have something?
No, you asked me a question, and I have something in my head that we can
Okay,
chat
don't
about
forget.
briefly.
Well, I was just gonna ask you our last question. What would you say is like the best piece of advice that you would give to either a new student or a new advisor looking to get interested in photography, brand new to it, really like love it, but they don't know where to get started?
Oh, um,
I know.
so my brain is currently in shutdown mode. So now it's got to reboot and I got to think through that. Um, Honestly, I think the best piece of advice it's so two part, right? Something that is on their shoulders and something that they need to make a connection. Um, Shoot, 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 shoot. Like practice, 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 but learn from your mistakes, right? Um, and have thick skin, because don't think you're going to be this amazing photographer capturing these amazing images right off the bat. Always be growing. And then that second part of it is connect with somebody that you can sit under them and you can shoot next to them. Look at what they get and don't ask them, what settings did you use? Ask them like, why did you frame up this photo the way it is? You can ask them about their settings, but ask them why they picked those settings,
Mm-hmm.
because you're going to learn the why behind the decisions that they made. Um, and then probably overarching all of that would be focus on the story more than anything. And that actually is a perfect, like you're like thinking the same thing, because so our neighborhood has a free library, which is awesome. We love to like grab stuff out of it. And
Libraries.
then,
I love that.
yeah, it's so cool. So my son grabbed this the other day. And so I'm looking through it and, you know, we want high quality images. You want like the technique to be there. You want the composition to be there. Like all of these things need to be, photographers need to be trained on these and they need to practice it over and over and over again. But don't forget that the story is what comes first. Because one of the two little things that I teach students that are like my pet peeves of sorts, and it's really not so much a pet peeve as, hey, this little secret, if you pay attention to this, your images are going to go from here to here, just with these tiny little changes. And it's watch the edges of your frame.
Mm-hmm.
So, don't crop fingers out. Don't crop, if somebody's swinging a baseball bat, don't crop the bat out. Don't crop out somebody's toes. Don't include, the traffic cone that's at the edge.
Right.
So pay attention to the edges. And then straighten your horizon. So if you have straight lines in the image, make them straight, vertical or horizontal.
Mm-hmm.
There's a quality of the image there that just like those two little changes, and it's like that picture's just got something. It's,
Yeah.
it's fine-tuned. So I say that to them and I'm talking about these finessing points. And then it's like, but remember that the story is the most important thing. And so as I was like flipping through this book, now I don't know if I can find one of the some of the pictures in here, but they're all film. They're all film photography.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, it's not a great picture. It's kind of ho hum. And I should have, if I would have been planning ahead, I should have flagged one that
Okay.
would have showed what I was talking about. Because now I'm not going to be able to find one, right? But let's see. But there's these shots in here that, from a technical standpoint, I would be like, you know, okay, here we go. So there's one right there, right? So if I'm seeing it up close in this book, and it's slightly blurry because it's a film image.
Mhm.
His feet are cropped off. It's like, okay, these are things that you know,
Critique.
I would kind of critique and maybe harp on a little bit. And there's definitely worse ones in here, like cropped in a little bit too tight on a basketball shot.
Mhm.
But it's a greatest moment, most memorable, image from sports history.
Yeah.
And the thing is, why? It's because of the moment. It's because of what was happening. And so what I would tell students is, and you can approach this from a journalistic perspective too. It's like, don't be so honed in on your own idea and focused on the questions you prepared or the image list that you came with, that you just totally miss a really, really awesome like nugget of information
Yeah.
and follow that in an interview, or photographically, like you miss that moment or you delete that photo because, oh, I was zoomed out too far,
Hmm.
or, oh man, I cropped off, their arms and their feet. No, like look at that facial expression and look at what you just captured. And so, yes, go for the technical quality, like really work those compositional skills. But they do play second fiddle to capturing an amazing storytelling image. And that's what you want, even if it's slightly out of focus.
Yeah.
Like there are certain things it's just like you need to show that image.
Yeah. Well, I always say too that like you learn the rules and then you learn when to break the rules because
Yes.
you know them. And a lot of times, also like the best camera you can have is the one you have with you. Like if
Hmm.
you're in the hallway and something story worthy is happening and you don't
Hmm.
have your DSLR, don't run to the yearbook room and be like, I have
Right.
a camera. Like whip your phone out and take a picture. Even if it's
Hmm.
crappy picture, you have that moment captured.
Right.
It takes that some training mentally to be ready for that. Like that's that photojournalist mentality that we need to teach our students.
Yep. And the way all the technical stuff fits into that, because I kind of come back to it, I'm like, so why is the technical stuff important? It's because you are able to very quickly make those decisions so you can get out of your own way
Mm-hmm.
and capture a better photo.
Yeah.
So,
Your camera also kind of becomes like an extension of your hand. Like it's just,
yes,
I just already know what to do. I know how to change my settings for this particular
right,
situation. And you take it and you're focused on the story instead of what ISO should I use right now in this hallway? Yeah.
right. You
Very
nailed it. That's right.
awesome. Well, thank you so much. This was so informative. I know that we're probably going to have more advisors and maybe students that have more questions. So I'll definitely put your website as well as some of the other websites you mentioned down in the description box.
Perfect.
But thank you so much for sharing your expertise. I know that you do such a great job of mentoring, student photographers and the advisors. And so if you guys are interested, definitely go look at his website and ask him, about what that looks like because he's available to help. And I know there's a lot of advisors and students that need the mentorship. So I love what you do, and I'm so glad that you were willing to come on here and share it with us a little bit today. Thank you so
So
much for
much
your
fun.
time.
Thanks, Katie.
Of course. All right. We'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.
See you later.